Okay. So it's 7 o'clock. So let's go to PowerPoint. Okay, so we're recording. We're talking about the skin. It's an integumentary system. So it has an epidermis, a dermis, and a hypodermis. It's called the cutaneous membrane. It protects, controls temperature, makes vitamin D, allows us to uh, feel heat, feel pressure, feel pain, excretes material in the sweat, waste products, and secretes uh, sweat to keep us cool. Okay, it does amazing things. Okay, back to let people in. Okay, we got 20 people or so. So, and we all have all different types of bacteria and fungus living on us. They basically uh, freeload on us, but we all have them. We all have bacteria. Now we all have plastic in our gut. So uh, vote. Okay, so what are the layers of the integument? Epidermis, dermis, and hypodermis. So let's look at the on the right here. Hair shaft, sweat gland. Okay, this little. So here's a pore for a sweat gland. These sweat glands are primarily for cooling. This little indentation into the epidermis is called an epidermal ridge. The indentation is called a dermal papilla. The epidermal ridge is the finger of the epidermis reaching down into the dermis. Sebaceous glands coats the hairs to make them waterproof. We get goosebumps because of the erector pili muscle. Sweat gland cools us through evaporative cooling. There's touch and pressure receptors. Hairs have follicles. The hair papilla is where the base of the hair follicle is where the hair is has cells that are dividing and growing, and so the hairs are uh, constantly growing, and they're there to help us uh, in thermoregulation. Okay, back to admit. Okay, so there'll be quite a bit of WebAssigns for what all these structures are. So these are the structures that you should know about, and we'll keep going through them. So the epidermis, in thick skin on your palms and the soles of your feet, there are 5 layers. The rest of the body has 4 layers. And the tissue is stratified squamous epithelium, meaning that it has many layers and it has flat cells that often don't look like they're flat, but the cutaneous membrane is made up of stratified squamous epithelium. If we look at the layers, starting from the basement membrane, where the cells grow, uh, the stratum germinativum, next is the stratum spinosum, stratum granulosum, thick skin has the stratum lucidum, and the stratum corneum is all dead keratinized tissue, meaning that it's been waterproofed. So if you look at uh, thick skin on the soles of the feet and the palms of the hand, you can see the stratum corneum is uh, very thick here. If you just touch your palm and touch your sole, you can see it's different from the skin on your arm, for instance. So here we have the stratum lucidum. It's the layer right at the base of the stratum corneum, then the stratum granulosum, the stratum the stratum spinosum, which has little spikes. So the dermis is right below the basement membrane. So this is called an epidermal ridge. This is called a dermal papilla. It's as if the fingers of the epidermis are grabbing onto the dermis, and the fingers of the uh, dermis are grabbing onto to hold on to the epidermis. So in the skin of the soles of the feet and the palms of your hand have 5 layers. Okay. The stratum germinativum is where cells divide and grow. Cells are constantly being replaced. Melanocytes secrete melanin pigment. We all have varying amounts of melanin pigment that gives us a certain color or hue to our skin. Okay, we got somebody else coming in. Okay, so we're moving right along. Okay. The stratum spinosum is the spiny layer. It's right on top of the stratum germinativum. The granule layer has these granules, and there's no cell division. And in the palm and the soles of the feet, you have this extra layer, the stratum lucidum. So notice there's no blood vessels in the stratum corneum or any part of the epidermis. Keratin is a protein that saturates the dead cells of the stratum corneum, and it makes it a tough, water-resistant layer. Melanocytes make melanin. There is also carotene, and hemoglobin is going to be in the blood vessels of the dermis. So the melanocytes are cells that secrete a pigment, and that gives us all varying protections from sunlight and UV radiation. And everybody knows the best way to get skin cancer is to get your skin roasted all the time. So UV radiation does affect the synthesis of vitamin D. We have to be careful of skin cancers. When I was a kid, we used to get burned to a crisp. I used to go to Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, and we didn't have any sun lotion or sun protectant. So I remember getting really burnt. Here's basal cell carcinoma and melanoma. If you have any suspicious growth, get it checked. Basal cell carcinoma can cause very, very difficult cancerous situations. There's a lot of people in Texas who have been exposed to the sun all their life, and they have to have these skin cancers removed. And basically, the dermatologist goes in and cuts out these neoplasms or neoplastic growth of which can be cancerous tissue. Okay, so it's multi-layers, prevents fluid loss, protection, produces vitamin D3, and resists damage from abrasion, chemicals, and keeps pathogens out. Then we have the dermis. Okay, so we're going to talk about these various structures. So we're going to have we'll tell you what the papillary layer is and what the reticular layer is. We have nerves, we have blood vessels, we have connective tissue, and the nervous system is going to control blood flow, sweat gland function, and sensation. So the dermis is below the epidermis. It provides strength, flexibility, and protection. Contains a lot of blood vessels and sensory receptors. So you sense the heat, you sense pressure, you sense pain. Below the dermis will be the hypodermis, or the subcutaneous layer. It has loose connective tissue. It's loosely attached to the dermis and to muscle. Helps thermally regulate the temperature of the body. Okay, we'll look at I'll tell you what you got to know about a hair follicle. Okay, so here you have the epidermis is very, very thin. You can see that it's very, very thin. We have hairs. So the dermis starts below this epidermis, very, very thin epidermis. The hair papilla is where the cells divide to produce a growing hair. Subcutaneous layer is right below the dermis. So all I want you to know is to be able to recognize a hair follicle and know that the hair papilla is where the hair cells divide and grow and continue to push the hair out of the body. The sebaceous gland applies wax, a waxy material or oily material to waterproof your hairs. This is the hair follicle. I want you to note that the epidermis sends cells to form the hair follicle. The hair papilla is, as I say, where growth occurs to produce continuing expanding cells that are then keratinized to form the hair. I'm not going to ask any questions on the cuticle or the cortex or the medulla. We're not worried about this slide. Sebaceous glands is an oil gland. Sebum waterproofs the hair. It's a skin waterproofing and skin lubricant also. So if we look at a cross section through the hair, you can see the sebaceous gland, and you can see the epidermal tissue that forms the hair follicle. And that sebaceous gland is where oily material is produced to waterproof the hair and the skin. We have two types of sweat glands. When we reach puberty, we get a particular odor about us in your armpits, your groin, and the areola of the breast. The American glands are for producing sweat to allow us to maintain and cool ourselves and maintain body temperature. So notice that American gland empties sweat onto the skin. The African gland is associated with a hair follicle. So I may have some questions in WebAssign on sweat glands. You should also know that the erecti pilli muscle allows us to have goosebumps to help in thermal regulation. Just think, every one of your hairs has this little muscle attached to it, and the hair grows from the hair papilla. There's also blood vessels, nerves, veins, arteries in the dermis. So it's very important that we control body temperature. And sweat is very, very important for us to survive. If you get too hot, you can die from hyperthermia. I'm not going to worry about nails. I won't ask any questions on that. No questions on skin healing. I'm not going to ask any questions on this. Make sure you read through this table. Just have an idea of what a first degree burn is, second degree, and third degree. We all get old. Okay, that's it. And I did everything in one lecture. So let's go back to here and turn off the recording. So we'll have the lecture. Stop recording.